Hey, how's it going? So I was contemplating on whether or not I wanted to talk about this because in general, when it comes to Steam hardware, like even though they do kind of match a lot of the points that tend to interest me regarding just Linux gaming or steamOS gaming, however they want to brand it. Obviously that a lot of that stuff interests me, but even with that said, I've never really been someone who's like super into the concept of SteamOS being the future of Linux gaming or anything like that. My stance has always been Linux is the future of Linux gaming. Arch Linux, CatchyOS, Bazide, or whatever. A lot of the existing Linux distros that exist out there. I feel like they're already doing a lot to really increase the viability of Linux gaming as a whole. But obviously, Valve does have stronger brand power. Like, there's a lot of people that they like, especially this year, last, and even in the previous years, I've always heard the sentiment of I'm waiting for Valve to release the SteamOS gaming distro, even though realistically SteamOS is probably not really going to do anything that will actually make it more viable for gaming, aside from maybe the convenience aspect, the fact that to a lot of people, because of the fact that SteamOS isn't immutable. You know what? I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Um, Valve announced three things. They announced the Steam controller, the Steam machine, as well as the Steam frame. Now, I'll briefly talk about the Steam controller, the Steam frame, because I don't really have a lot to say. So, for the Steam controller, it's basically a much more up to date variant of the existing Steam controller that, like, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's unlikely I'm gonna get this because it looks interesting, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm someone who's way too accustomed to the DualSense. I don't see myself using any other controller other than that. But still, it's an interesting controller. Reminds me of the Steam Deck in some ways, and especially the Joy Cons. It definitely reminds me of the Steam Deck, and also the trackpad. The position of the Joy Cons is a little bit, it's a little bit closer to how DualShocks and DualSense controllers are designed, because with the Steam Deck, for example, I'm actually opening the Steam Deck right now because I want to confirm. But basically, um, yeah, exactly. The Joy Cons, um, they're located in a similar position as the DualShock and DualSense, but it's a little bit they're a little bit more side by side. It's slightly lower, but it's mostly side by side. And I think there are some benefits to designing it this way. I think it's a little bit more flexible for people that interchange between different controllers, because PlayStation is basically the only one that like makes the left Joy-Con located at the bottom, while every other console manufacturer, they tend to locate it at the top. But still, it looks cool. I don't think I'm gonna get this one, but I thought also one other pretty big advantage of this controller, which I'll talk a little bit more later, is that it does have a Steam button that presumably allows you to wake up the Steam machine remotely, so you don't need to click the Steam machine button, which I think is good for convenience. And yeah, the other thing is the Steam frame, which is their new VR machine. I'm not super into VR, so I'm not gonna comment too much on this. But one thing about this that I do think it's pretty interesting is the fact that this is running an ARM chip, and it is running SteamOS, as in this device here. The most interesting aspect of this is the fact that Valve seems to be pushing ARM with Linux, and so they're obviously going to continue to update this, and I think it may end up providing some pretty big advancements when it comes to the ARM architecture on Linux, which I think is a pretty good thing. And they even said that like the Steam frame is basically just a PC. You can use it as a PC. You don't have to use it as a VR device, which I think is pretty interesting. I hope that this will represent a shift in ARM on Linux, and I do believe that this can end up changing a lot. But let's get back to the Steam machine, because this is what I mainly wanted to talk about, and I have a lot that I want to say about this. So, for starters, this is pretty small. Like, I saw some videos and pictures, and I could be wrong, but like the size of this device almost seemed like similar to like a PSU, obviously bigger than that, but still, like it's a pretty small unit. It's basically meant to like be like a mini PC essentially. I'm not super concerned about the cooling solution, even though obviously that would be the thing that people would be the most concerned about. But honestly, I've been paying attention to companies like Minis Forum and stuff like that, and I know that there's been a lot of progress in the mini PC scene. Like there's been a lot of work into making sure these devices run as efficiently, as cool and quiet as possible. So I'm not too concerned about this, even though this is definitely the main thing that people would be concerned about. But I feel pretty confident on that department. And honestly, I trust Valve that they would take that into account pretty heavily. It's running steamOS, so it's basically just an Arch Linux, but with the steamOS interface, and it's also immutable. It has an immutable file system. Now what I mainly wanted to talk about is the CPU and GPU. But before I get to that, I did like the fact that they are now adding in a new verification badge. So basically, we have the steamOS verification badge. That one is just generally talking about the steamOS operating system, and so this would apply to a lot of devices because initially it was just the Steam Deck, but now there's like the Lenovo Legion Go. But now there's also this Steam Machine, but they do have a separate one for Steam Machine, which I think is pretty good. I think a lot of developers, they can take that into consideration when optimizing their games, which I think is a good thing. And obviously it's a PC. The Steam Deck is also a PC, so who cares? Now, they did say that this PC does have a Wi-Fi adapter. No, actually no, not Wi-Fi. Actually, wait. Okay, it's not Wi-Fi, but it is a wireless adapter that's specifically for the Steam controller, which does allow the device to wake up upon clicking the Steam button. Now the thing is, based on this GIF as well as the wording, I think they're only talking about the device when it's in sleep mode, which I think is a little bit like it's better than nothing, I guess, but still I would have preferred if you could turn on this thing even when it's turned off, because then it would just essentially match the level of convenience of a standard console in which you can just turn it on even when it's powered off, because not everyone's gonna leave this thing in sleep mode, because while leaving devices on sleep mode is fine, but after a certain point it's ideal if you reboot it, because just for stability purposes and stuff like that. And so it's a little bit of shame if this only wakes up after sleep, but that's still better than nothing, because this thing that you couldn't even do that. So I think it's a good improvement regardless. And it's mentioning here that there's like a couple of USB ports. I do remember watching a video from Gamers Nexus in which they stated that you can actually upgrade the RAM, which is a good thing, though I'm gonna be honest with you, the RAM is not, like, the DRAM is not my main concern. It's actually the VRAM, and this is where we're going to talk about the CPU and GPU. Now, the CPU, I don't really have a lot to say. Ideally, I would have preferred if this was an 8-core CPU, but 6 cores for the most part, it's still fine. Like, games for the most part are not that heavy on multi-threading, and so you're probably still fine with 6 cores. And as far as like I remember, like I think I very much remember the fact that like Zen 4 in general, like even the 6 cores, they have a pretty notable advantage in multi-threading performance compared to even Zen 3. And the Steam Deck isn't even based on Zen 3, it's based on Zen 2, so you would see an even bigger uplift, even when compared to CPUs that have like higher core counts, like 8 cores. And so this is probably not too concerning. Honestly, my main concern would just mainly be when it comes to emulation, because a lot of emulators tend to be pretty heavy on the core counts, especially RPCS 3, but I think 6 cores is probably fine. I'm not too concerned. Boosts up until 4.8, pretty good. That's pretty good. 30 watts, so it's not really consuming a ton of power, which is a good thing. Now, the GPU is what mainly concerns me. Now, it's RDNA 3, and it's also 28 CUs. Now, 28 CUs would put this above the Xbox Series S, because if I'm not mistaken, okay, so it has 20 compute units. So this one does have more, which is a good thing. Um, and it also has a better architecture. It's RDNA 3 instead of RDNA 2, so there could just be generation uplifts even solely based on that, which is a good thing. And so yeah, I would say that the GPU performance is at least a bare minimum above the Xbox Series S, which I think it's decent. Like I I think that's fine enough. Like honestly, if you can provide Xbox Series S performance, that's not a bad thing, depending on how this will be priced. But my main concern is actually with the RAM. This to me is the biggest problem because I'm gonna be honest with you, 16 gigabytes of DRAM, that's not really a big deal. Like I've tested a lot of virtual machines with 16 gigabytes, and generally speaking, what I've noticed is that if you have 16, unless you're playing with like really high resolution textures and I guess also ray tracing, like you probably don't need to worry about the DRAM exceeding 16 gigabytes. However, the VRAM is a different story because um, in the past couple of years, especially 2024 to 2025, we've been seeing more and more games, specifically ones that are next gen exclusives, that are becoming very demanding on the VRAM. And so while I am aware that like this PC will probably for the most part like be running games at 1080p, maybe upscale it to 4K through FSR, which I'll get into FSR in a minute, but still, if you're running games at 1080p, maybe the VRAM is not going to be as much of a problem. But even at 1080p, I remember seeing some benchmarks from Hardware Unboxed that shows that even at 1080p, 8 gigabytes is starting to become a real problem, and so I'm a little bit concerned about this. The only saving grace regards to this is that it's possible that the GPU, the just overall compute power of the GPU, is probably going to be, it's probably like the game might end up being GPU bound before VRAM becomes a problem. And so that's one thing I will state, is that maybe on that department it might not be too concerning, because I'm sure Valve has done a lot of testing to be sure they find the sweet spot for this, and so that's my only saving grace. But still, this does concern me a little bit, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And I assume you can upgrade. Yeah, in fact, not only can you upgrade, but I've actually seen. I saw Gamers Nexus video, and the NVMe slot. You can actually. It's very similar to a lot of like to a lot of M.2 slots on like motherboards, in which there's like multiple holes for the screw based on the size of the NVMe SSD. And so even though the one that comes with the Steam machine is like relatively small, even if you buy like the larger one, it should be fine. So that's a good thing. And I like the fact that this does have a display port. This is really good, especially because HDMI recently has been kind of a bitch when it comes to providing an open source solution for HDMI. I believe it's 2.1. So I'm glad they have DisplayPort, and just for that alone, I'll primarily use DisplayPort for the rest of my life. But yeah, and the other thing I also did want to talk about a little bit more is the fact that they advertise the fact that you can run 4K gaming at 60 FPS with FSR. Now the thing is, the part about FSR, there's a couple of angles that you can look into this. So for starters, recently a lot of games, depending on the tier of card, they've actually been stating that you need to play with FSR as like a requirement, even if you're running the game at 1080p. Like that's actually something that I've been seeing more and more with a lot of like those system requirement sheets. And so and a lot of the times they're talking about like low settings and low to medium settings. And so I don't know how much this will, like, because if we were if we were back in like 2020 or before then, I would have maybe believed this, because I would have believed that maybe this device would be able to run a lot of 1080p games. Maybe not like at like high settings, but still like 1080p games, medium somewhat. And yeah, with FSR you'd be able to upscale it to 4K. But recently, even if you want to play games at 1080p, they're telling you should use an upscaler, and so I'm a little bit concerned in regards to that. The only saving grace would perhaps be the fact that, and honestly, this is something that a lot of us, like it's not made official, but a lot of us already kind of know, which is at some point FSR 4 is probably going to be supported by RDNA 3. Like it's not now, but like I think I think it's pretty obvious that at some point it is going to be possible, and maybe by the time this device comes out, FSR 4 is going to be usable in RDNA 3. But even then, they would, I guess, we to play at 4K, maybe you would need to set the settings down to performance, which honestly, FSR 4 with performance mode doesn't look too bad. Especially if you're playing at 4K, in which you may legitimately just not really notice a lot of like a lot of the drawbacks of FSR at 4K. So that could be a saving grace. But it would certainly be a situation where I really hope that FSR 4 will be available for RDNA 3 by that point. And even then, not every game supports FSR 4, so for a lot of them, they would still need to rely on FSR 2. And FSR 2, it's very hit or miss at 4K, especially with performance mode. Like if you're playing with like quality or balance at 4K, then it's probably fine. But like at performance mode, I guess this is a small factor PC, so maybe I guess there's a little bit of setting up expectations that you also have to take in. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just freaking out for no reason, but this is definitely something that's concerning me just a little bit. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And yeah, of course, FSR might end up helping alleviate some of the VRAM concerns. And honestly, a lot of the times, people tend to run out of VRAM because of the settings that they're running at. Like if you're running games at like ultra settings with like 5060s or something like that, that's usually where you'll end up getting limited by the VRAM. But with this, especially if a lot of games already have like preset settings for the Steam machine that the game recognizes instantly after recognizing the hardware specs, then maybe you'll see a lot of games already have like the optimized settings running by default, which I really hope we'll see more of that. We did see that a little bit with the Steam Deck, but not with every game. Not every game has like optimized settings available by default. But it is certainly something that we did see quite a bit with some of the games, especially like newer ones, especially the ones that are like they're like deck verified. So I guess that might end up helping for a lot of people where they might not even really think about the VRAM issue because they'll just boot up the game and it'll already have the optimized settings. And again, maybe a case where it's running like really low presets of FSR and stuff like that. But again, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And obviously, a lot of those games would not be running at like high settings. But honestly, I don't think a lot of games you really need to run at like cinematic or ultra or epic settings. Like I've even talked about this in the past when I was testing Lost Soul Aside. I said that like, if you play the game at high settings, it's fine. Like you don't really need to run at like the highest presets, which is where the game tends to really struggle to run at even really high graphics cards. So like really high end graphics cards. So I think it's also might be a case of people just being a little bit more willing to accept low to mid settings, which today's day and age, low to mid settings are not the same as like yesterday's low to mid settings. So I think I remember like there's a couple of games in which when you compare the lower or mid settings that the game has, it's like relatively higher in terms of fidelity compared to like games released like years prior, generations prior. So that's also something I think it's worth noting. But yeah, beyond that, I guess my other concern, well, it's actually not really concern. It's more so a warning, and that's in regards to the specs, because this will be an AMD build, and I do expect Valve to continue to offer optimizations for AMD CPUs and especially GPUs. And this being RDNA 3 is a good thing because now this architecture will also be a priority, which I think it's always kind of been. Like, honestly, in general, like RAD V and the open source Linux drivers, they handle Alternate 3 pretty well. It's really Alternate 4 where we're seeing some performance progressions compared to Windows. It's not with every game, but we have noticed like there's a trend of running a little bit worse, at least initially. Maybe now it's gotten better, but Alternate 3, as far as I'm aware, like a lot of games actually run better on Linux than it does on Windows. And I guess what I would only say is that I think the AMD experience on Linux is going to continue getting better. But if you're someone who's, for example, if you're one of the people that are waiting for steamOS for desktop to arrive, you might need to consider the fact that, you know, if you have like an Intel CPU and especially an NVIDIA card, that maybe you may not receive special treatment. You may not receive a first class citizen experience. And while I wouldn't say that you should switch to AMD just because of that, I would certainly say that if you are someone who's planning to abandon Windows and you don't want to use the existing Linux distros out there that exist, which by the way, many of them, they do have NVIDIA into consideration. Bazite, for example, has like dedicated drivers and stuff like that to work pretty well with NVIDIA cards. So that's also something you can consider. But if you're someone who's really dead set on only using steamOS by Valve because you only trust their steamOS, their gaming distro, I guess, you might need to consider the fact that maybe you might need to go all AMD, which is not something that I would necessarily recommend. Honestly, I would just tell you go use Bazite, but still, it is something worth considering. But yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to share. This is cool, I guess, for the most part. I think to me, the most interesting thing about this is the fact that this may end up competing with Xbox's upcoming generation of, you know, console and PC hybrid. And to be honest with you, I think people are going to be, at least for me personally, this is more interesting than whatever Xbox is planning to do. And I'm kind of interested in seeing how this could end up serving as a replacement to consoles, which I think is a good thing. Because I feel like for a while, PlayStation hasn't really been taking Xbox super seriously as a competitor, but Steam, maybe they might be a little bit concerned, and I like that. I like that about it. And honestly, I'm always gonna root for Linux gaming, and so it's gonna be something I'm gonna keep an eye every once in a while. And yeah, that's all. Thank you very much for watching this video.